Hello and welcome to Reporters, Targa Communications podcast series where we swap seats with well-known property journalists and get them to answer the questions we pose them. I'm Andrew Barber from the London office, and today I am talking to Robin Marriot, Editor-in-Chief of Property EU magazine. Good morning, Robin. Come on down to the comfy sofa.
Good morning, Andrew. Thanks very much for inviting me.
How are you?
I'm fine. Well, like everybody else, I'm working in somewhere peculiar. It's in the summer house, which I built a couple of years ago, but I never envisaged I'll be spending like 10 hours a day here. But that's indeed what's happening, and frankly, going slowly insane. Looking forward to getting out back to coffee shops and doing face-to-face meetings again.
Yeah, I mean, it's strange, isn't it? Over 10 weeks ago, we'd say, how are you? And it was just a passing kind of pleasantry, but now it's a sort of genuine concern. How have you been coping with lockdown and working remotely? Has that been something which has come naturally to you? Has it been an easy transition? I'm guessing that as an international publication, you and the team are fairly used to working remotely and in, as you say, coffee shops, that sort of environment.
We've just finished, Andrew, the first magazine done completely virtually, as it happens, which was the May issue. And look, let's be honest, we were pretty concerned to not be able to meet with your production editor and your design editor to kick about ideas and to make sure things look really good on the page. It's pretty frightening. But as it happens, it's gone pretty smoothly. You know, the technology like Zoom, of course, has helped. A lot more phone calls have been held and a lot more to and froing on email. But I have to say it's gone well. The May issue came out looking really good and there were no mishaps whatsoever. And so now we're right in the thick of producing the June issue. And I guess we've got a little bit more skilled in using technology now to make sure that happens well.
Yeah, and is that sort of the same for your news gathering? Has there been much different? I mean, obviously you can't go and have a coffee with a PR person or a contact within the industry. You obviously rely more. Have you found that flow of news has been different? Has it been coming thick and fast, or has it been more tricky to track it down?
Well, the funny thing is, Andrew, on news gathering, in the very early days of this lockdown, if anything, I found myself talking more to industry participants than less. And that's because, of course, everyone was in a state of shock. No one really was able to do much at all. So I was wandering around on the patio talking to, the heads of investment managers and agents and so on. But the only problem was nothing was actually happening. So there was nothing to report on, apart from the personal elements. As people got used to the lockdown, I have to say that if anything, the news flow has been absolutely sort of fantastic. There's been no shortage of things to report on. We did something that a lot of other publications did, which was to make our access open to readers. We've seen this in previous crises, frankly. When you have a crisis, the demand spikes for information. Everybody wants to know what everybody else is thinking and doing. And we just felt like it would be more of a public service to make our articles open access, which we did. We did that for about a month, and it's now reverted back to access for subscribers only. But it's worth noting that, frankly, on that side of the publishing business, it has been great. It means that we've had a lot more eyeballs on our articles.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, have you seen an increase in subscriptions and online traffic?
Definitely. We have a counter on our articles, and you could see that there's a noticeable difference. So I would say, and I was joking with someone the other day that who produced a guest article for us. Normally, that kind of thing would probably attract a few hundred views, but in the early days of the lockdown, you're talking about thousands, almost I think 10,000 in that instance, which is pretty unheard of for an article of that type. So that just tells you the uptick that we've seen in visitors to our website. But I was going to say that the good thing has been, for the business anyway, converting those people that had free access into subscribers. So our sales team's been very busy chasing up all those that have been able to read our articles for the last 4-8 weeks, and seeing if they want to make that into a permanent arrangement, which has been obviously good for business. But if you want to, we can also go into the downside, which of course is the lack of events. And as you'll know, magazines like ours absolutely thrive on events, because it's a very good reason for our customers to put adverts into the magazine. And without events, unfortunately, it takes away a big driver for people to want to take out adverts. So that is where we've seen the most pressure. Yeah. I should say, again, what that really means is our sales team has just had to double down. It's had to be much more creative and work harder with our clients to ensure that we present them with all the opportunities that we can. And it's somehow they've managed to hit targets for April, May, June. 1 month was slightly off. 1 month was pretty much just on target. And I think for the next issue, the July issue, we're actually going to beat targets, which is quite an unusual state of affairs.
That's impressive.
But it is, but that's not to blow our own trumpet, and it's not to be complacent, because the big issue we're going to have, Andrew, frankly, is Expo Real and whether that actually goes ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, obviously, with your countdown publication that you do for Expo Real, the official preview and the daily news, this is obviously one of the sort of major events in your calendar. And there's lots of people out there like me. I've got a flight booked from Gatwick out to Munich. I don't know if I'm going to use it. I haven't booked any accommodation yet. And obviously the Oktoberfest isn't happening, which is a big disappointment. When do you think we're going to hear? Because clearly Germany as a whole is coming out of lockdown ahead of the UK, but Bavaria has suffered worse than other parts of Germany. Have you got any inside track on this at the moment?
Well, the timing of this podcast, Andrew, is absolutely perfect, because it was only yesterday that we reported on the Bavarian state government coming out and saying it will allow trade fairs to take place from September the 1st. So that's obviously very positive news, and has been already welcomed warmly by Messe München, which is, of course, the organiser of Expo. But the key is, Andrew, it's exhibitors. It's whether exhibitors are actually going to sign those contracts with Expo and turn up. Don't forget that at this stage of the year, Expo would have had many contracts in front of it. It would have been signing these things left, right, and centre. But of course, that actually hasn't happened at all for obvious reasons. Yeah. So we're quite close to Expo, and we know that they're working very hard. But frankly, they're a little bit powerless. They have to wait to see what the reaction will be from the exhibitors themselves as to whether they're going to sign up. And if that happens, of course, then they can be much more confident, and we'll know that the show is going to go ahead. Yeah. But the other thing is, even if it does go ahead, let's be absolutely honest, the event is going to look very, very different, not least because of all the safety measures that are going to be put into place. So I'll give you an example. So what we're hearing is, of course, there's lots of talk about social distancing if the event goes ahead, hygiene, even the collection of contact information for the purpose of sort of follow-ups. We're hearing of one-way pathways. So for anyone that's ever been to Expo Real, they'll know that it's staged in something like 6 halls. Now, can you imagine a one-way system?
I know, it's incredible, because sometimes on the first couple of days of Expo, I mean, you think, I'll just go into the next hall because I'm going to meet someone. I'm going to meet them there in 10 minutes. You give yourself 10 minutes. It takes you 25, 30 minutes just to get through. The queues are astronomical sometimes, aren't they? And the flow of people, to try and put that into a one-way system it beggars belief, really, how they're going to achieve that. And it's going to be quite frustrating for people because you're going to be that close to something and think, oh, crap, we'll walk all the way down one of these huge halls.
This is it. But of course, I think that said, people, you have to expect less numbers if it does go ahead. So perhaps that will negate some of the difficulties of the one-way system. But nevertheless, that's going to feel very strange. But I can tell you some more about it. They're also thinking of having anti-spit protection at the counters, apparently. You're talking about counters, tables, door handles being disposed of completely this year due to physical contact restrictions.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to attend this year for that, if nothing else.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we'll wait to hear. Let us know when you hear anything. And talking of the sort of the German market, but also European market, what sort of 2 or 3 things have you noticed about the market trends and things that you've seen, heard about, written about? What's your view of how it's all going?
Well, Andrew, this is a massive question.
I know.
I try not to repeat things your listeners will already know, because there's a lot of information out there about the future of the office and so on and so forth. So, but let me just tell you a couple of things that may not be quite as apparent just from our side. Let's take the capital markets first. So I'm talking about the investors and clients of investment managers. So those would be the pension funds, endowments, corporate pension schemes, and so on. Well, of course, they've been shocked these past few weeks, and they've hit the pause button when it comes to decisions. And I mean decisions to invest their capital with investment managers. So that's absolutely clear. But on the positive side, when I speak to the investment managers, at least it's given this pause has given them a number of weeks to actually spend longer talking to these investors, because frankly, there's not much else to be done. So they're actually thinking that their plans for new products, new funds, are going to be able to take shape a bit better, just because there's more information and viewpoints being exchanged in this unusual market. Whereas in a normal functioning market, time is condensed. You don't quite get the quality time you would like with investors. So at least there is that silver lining to mention. But investment managers have been absolutely frantic, haven't they? Examining their portfolio, seeing where the stresses are. And this is all about, frankly, whether the rents are going to be paid and, how that's going to be managed through the crisis. And investment managers are definitely telling me that the pain is going to be seen much more in the coming months. So it won't be pretty for many, many people. Mm. So that's really on the investment management side. On landlord-tenant issues, Andrew, interesting. This is something perhaps your listeners may not have learned just yet, and it's pretty fresh. We're hearing that the UK really is the focus right now, because tenants out there in the UK are now seeking legal advice on how to get COVID-19 clauses into their lease agreements going forward. Okay, so there is no market standard approach, but we're hearing this from law firms right now. And in many countries across Europe, remember, they have a statutory backstop, which means commercial tenants, they're familiar with the concepts of force majeure, and they can kind of assume that a global pandemic like COVID-19 can relieve contractual liabilities. But that doesn't apply in the UK. So there's never been a reported case applying our limited doctrine of frustration to a real estate contract, you see. So, and if you remember, it was only last year that the European Medicines Agency was unable, if you remember, to successfully argue that its rental obligations to the landlords, Canary Wharf Group, were frustrated by Brexit.
Yeah.
So now the UK government has not mandated any clear contractual solutions. And so what that means is it's actually left to the landlord and tenants to agree new terms in their contracts going forward. Let me just quote from one lawyer I spoke to just yesterday, Claire Harmon Clark at Taylor Wessing. So she's a senior professional support lawyer at the firm. And what she's saying is this crisis is really raising important questions on the distribution of risk, if you like, within the new contracts. It's in everyone's interest to avoid these massive rent debts or broken agreements, which are going to lead to expensive disputes, especially when we have no precedents or frustration to rely on in an extreme situation like this. So I would say to your listeners, watch out for developments in lease agreements and in particular COVID-19 clauses.
Yeah, this whole situation in terms of, as you say, the leases, but in terms of rent payments and all these sort of, frankly, almost boring topics to a lot of people have suddenly really come into focus in the last few weeks during this awful crisis. So we will keep an eye on that one. So thank you for tipping us off on that. Could I ask another question? Well, clearly, we're doing this interview today, this podcast via Zoom. And I'm guessing for you as an international editor and an international publication, you have been quite familiar with using Zoom and Skype and Teams and all the others in the past. But there's lots of people out there in the property sector who have not previously had the need to use video conferencing in this way or so intensively. Do you think that the widespread adoption of this technology will perhaps have an impact on the way the property industry looks at technology? Are there implications for proptech as a whole, do you think?
Zoom's been massive, it really has. I'm presumably, though, it will be used less as people are able to travel more. That must be the common sense assumption. Although I think that the use of platforms like Zoom is not going to fall away overnight or instantly. I think you surely will see more use of it going forward. But I tell you what, this has brought into sharp focus. It's really just taking it to the real estate perspective. What about virtual reality and augmented reality being used to assess assets? Whether you want to lease an asset as an occupier or if you want to buy it, you would have thought that during this lockdown period, this would be absolutely the time that augmented reality, virtual reality would come to the fore, wouldn't you? But in the early days, what we were hearing was from investment managers and from investors, frankly, no one is going to take a big decision without actually having physically toured an asset. So that was very much part and parcel of the slowdown, and it will lead to data soon showing that there's been way less volume of investment because we've lost 8 weeks. But it's funny, because we issued a survey to our readers a few weeks ago asking in an open box question, what's on your mind? And we received many ideas. And of course, they're all being translated into articles. But one was exactly on this point. So we've already had journalists working and assessing to what extent virtual reality has been used. And frankly, we couldn't find any companies that wanted to talk to us about it. And that led to a natural hunch that, well, that's because it's as we would say in England, a bit of a busted flush, that actually it's kind of a nice thing to have, but practically speaking, people won't use it. But Andrew, it was only 2 days ago that out of the blue, while having initially declined to talk to us, BNP Paribas came back and said, hey, we've got something we want to say about virtual reality. And they're saying that they introduced a platform called Matterport. I think it may have been last year or the year before. They showcased it at MIPIM, and I've used it, and it's very good, very fun to use with goggles, etc. And you can tour any property, any property you like. But they say that it has actually been used a lot in recent weeks, particularly in the UK residential business that they have, which is Stratton Parker, as you know. They've actually used it to agree a handful of sales, so that's sight unseen over the last 2 months as a result of using Matterport's virtual viewing technology. Now, these aren't massive deals, Andrew. I mean, one is a prime property in Ascot in England, which has been sold for 5.5 million. So that's not
5.5 million.
Yeah, that's not big. So I don't think that they're suggesting this is happening for huge assets, but at least it's being used to some extent. That's on the residential side, Andrew.
Yeah,
on the
well,
commercial.
I can guess that the issue is one of the investments in technology, because there are lots of people who won't have invested in that sort of technology. Or clearly, some on the scale of BNP Paribas Real Estate and Stratton Parker have got the finances perhaps to invest in that. But the vast majority of companies smaller than one of those big companies is just never going to have been able to do that. So, maybe we'll focus attention on such technology. And maybe had that investment been made, or had this happened 5 years down the line, then maybe we would have seen more virtual reality and augmented reality being used. I mean, I can see normal videos being used, video tours, if you like, during this stage to attract people in to look at assets or houses or whatever it is.
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right. I mean, but if BNP Paribas, with the size that it has, is saying that virtual viewings are here to stay, then you can only imagine that this will eventually trickle down to the smaller participants in the market. I would guess.
Yeah, that's good. That's really interesting. Thank you for that. I just wondered. We talked about your growing readership. I'm going to test you here now, because I had a look at your website earlier, and you have a mission statement, which I'm not going to ask you to quote off the top of your head, but it was obviously the Property was established 2006, and the stated mission was to help foster transparency in the European markets. And I wondered, cheekily, how's that going? But also, do you think transparency across your target market is still an issue? Is it improving, or is that something which, again, COVID-19 and the pandemic may bring into focus in terms of the transparency of transactions and what's going on in the market?
Look, Andrew, as a journalist, you can never have enough transparency. And but that also goes for the market participants, particularly investors.
Yeah, sure.
And InRev started the same year as us, I think, in 2006, and they're still on the same mission. They've had many wins. They've introduced many initiatives to increase transparency, but the job is not done yet. I should point out that in a previous job, I worked for a magazine that was absolutely all about private equity, and that's probably the least transparent part of the market. And whilst we've seen improvements in that area, it's still a very, very private, insular market, which is why actually there's good reason, commercial reason, to have a magazine in that space, because someone needs to shine a light on that market, and people are very keen to gobble up news and views about it. But our magazine covers private markets, but also public markets, and that, of course, is by definition very transparent. You've got a whole set of data providers out there. We provide our own data, but there are others as well. So it's quite good to get a hand on the market. But I've never actually come across anything that provides 100% transparency and accuracy, sadly. So it's just never going to be like the public equities market, unfortunately. But if everything was completely transparent, frankly and selfishly, there may not be such a need for magazines like ours. So...
Okay, that's cool. Look, Robin, that's been absolutely fantastic, and really appreciate your time today. Before I let you go, and I'm conscious of the time, I have a question or two for you, just to throw at you, a couple of curveballs. Clearly, we're recording this at the end of May, and yesterday evening the UK government announced sort of a toning down of the restrictions as of next week in terms of lockdown. When lockdown comes to an end, or when you're allowed to do it, where would you like to take your family for your first post-lockdown meal? What restaurant? It's all right. I won't let your children or your wife listen to this, so you can be as honest as you want.
When lockdown is over, Andrew, taking my family anywhere with me is the last thing I'm going to do. I'm looking forward to getting I'm looking forward to getting back to the coffee shops of Blackheath, where I live, particularly when it comes to restaurants. Lebanese and Indian I've been missing quite badly, so that's probably what I will do. But I will go there alone.
Will you? I've already had to commit. My son is desperate to go to McDonald's. But like you, I've been really missing Indian food. And I have, as a lot of people have been sort of taking up new hobbies, my latest hobby is curry cooking. And I could just eat it morning, noon, and night. I'm really enjoying that. Back to property, though. One final question. Favourite building, favourite piece of architecture. You've travelled the world. Where is your favourite building? What is your favourite building?
Favourite building? Wow. I'm not going to say the HQ of Property EU, which is in Utrecht. It's a CBRE GI building. It's very green. It's got all the high ratings. But, gosh, that's the question.
Are you going to see a summer house? A summer house in Blackheath?
No, I'm fed up. I'm fed up with this particular structure. I can tell you that. No, I think Andrew, probably, let's get into the city first. Probably New York, where I spent a year working. Absolutely love the vibe in that city. Pretty much any building as you walk the streets of Manhattan excite me. I love old buildings where you can see so much potential for improvement. So something like Penn Station, I would say, has got a certain character to it, and I just longing for the day when they give that a spruce up, much like they have done with London Bridge Station in London. So it's tired buildings with a lot of history that could be improved massively. That's what I like looking at. You're
a frustrated developer, aren't you?
With my surname Marriot, I would like everything to be turned into a hotel.
And on that note, Robin Marriott, Editor-in-Chief of Property EU, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Really appreciate your time and your market insights. Thanks very much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, Andrew.
No worries.